What's up, guys? Welcome back to another Revit video. In this video we're looking at more materials. It's awesome. We're looking at specifically the graphics tab of the materials dialog box in Revit. In a previous video we covered the identity tab, where we looked at all the data that went into a material itself, then all the data that then goes into the finish schedule. So from here we're now looking at, in the manage tab, we're looking at materials, and then the graphics tab. So all this information that you would see as far as the graphics go of a material. So right now we've got, again, this is a project where I've stripped out all the materials, except just a few that I've kept and a couple that I've added just as placeholders. So right now let's go ahead and work with this stone material. So looking at this stone material, let's go ahead and apply that in our project. Let's hit OK, and I just want to apply that to the exterior of this wall. I've used this same wall in a number of places throughout the project, so we'll see how this works. So let's go to the exterior here, and we'll use stone here. We can actually just type in stone as well. And of course, because I didn't spell it right, it doesn't work. But if I type in stone and then it is a material, I can just type it in there. I can also just copy and paste it. That works the same that way. But I do, in fact, I don't want stone on the interior, so we'll put that back to by category. So now we've got stone on the exterior. Okay, nothing changed. We can still see that nothing changed. It looks the same. Let's go ahead and put this on hidden line. So we're all white. It's black and white. We're starting from scratch. So again, let's go to materials, and now let's start to impact some of these different options that we have within our graphics tab. So looking at the graphics tab of the materials, what do we have? We've got shading, which is basically saying, are we using this rendered appearance as in a color, and there's a transparency applied to that. Then we've got a surface pattern with the foreground and background, and then we've got a cut pattern with the foreground and background. Okay, pretty much makes sense. So the surface pattern being every single surface, so like a face of a wall would show up, any face that's not within an object. So in the case of a cut pattern, that's if I were to cut a section or cut halfway through a wall, for example, then in fact we'd start to see these patterns populate there. We'll look at that later on in this video. So starting off with surface pattern, this is all by default set to none once you go and create a new material, unless you duplicate one, so be aware of that. So just looking at this now, foreground, the pattern we have to choose from, and I've got a lot in this project, but it's a basic pattern. All these different hatch patterns, and you have the option of choosing between drafting and model. And so this is actually only available to us between drafting and model, that is, within our foreground options. So if I look at my background, I can no longer use model. So I'm simply stuck with a drafting pattern as my background. So that's something to be aware of. If you're looking to use a model pattern, then you're going to have to use the foreground. So what's the difference between a drafting hatch pattern and a model hatch pattern? Well, let's look at this visually. So I'm going to go ahead and apply just a basic crosshatch. There we go, crosshatch there. I will go ahead and put this on black, and I'll hit OK. And as soon as I do that, we can see that crosshatch now shows up, and we can see that it does show up where all the materials are applied. So these walls have that material stone applied, and we can see that those hatch patterns are associated to it. So you might say, okay, this hatch is associated to a particular material, of course, but more specifically, maybe that hatch pattern is tied to that material because it's at a particular scale, like you have stone like sized at 6 by 6 inches, something like that. Okay, that's great, and this is looking pretty good. Now the one problem that we have, again, this is a drafting hatch pattern. The one problem we have with that is that this type of hatch pattern, be it drafting, will scale with the scale of our drawing. So just to display this, I'm going to change the scale of this drawing. Again, I'm just in 3D, so it won't actually change the look of anything in 3D, but you'll see that it will have an impact on the drafting pattern. So let's go ahead and put this at 6 inches. And as soon as I do that, we basically don't see the hatch pattern at all. And I'm going to actually bring this up until we get to the point where we start to see this once again. And still we don't so there we can finally start to see it at 1/2 inch. And you can clearly tell, obviously the objects in this 3D view didn't change size. I just changed the scale of this 3D view. Yet the size, or scale, size, and scale of the detail hatch pattern did change. So that tells me that if you're looking for something specific as far as a dimension goes when it comes to a hatch pattern, you're not going to want to use drafting, because inherently they work, in synchronization with the scale of your view. So hatch patterns you're going to see mostly within 2D views, in detail views, filled regions, everything like that within a 2D view. They're all clearly scaled, and that's fine. Just it's something to be aware of, obviously. Now, if I go back way the other way at a 16th, that looks absurd as well. So in neither circumstance is this correct. Is this correctly showing a 6-inch by 6-inch tile? That's just not the that's just not the case. And something else that would tell you that it's a drafting pattern is that if you try to move or align any of these joints, or just let's call them lines in the hatch pattern, you can't move them. Like they're basically stuck where they are. So if I want to align the side of the wall there, I can't do that. Now, that's just with drafting hatch patterns. Now let's look at model hatch patterns and see what we have. So I'm going to change this now from drafting to model, and not only that, we have a different selection of hatch patterns because these are model and not drafting. Perfect. Now we actually want a particular size of case. So in this case, let's use this 6-inch by 6-inch tile. I'll hit OK. There we go. So there's our 6-inch by 6-inch tile. And now I'm going to change the scale from 1/16 back to, I think it was 1/2 inch. And we will see that this hatch pattern does not change at all. And that is because it's now a model hatch pattern, and it is basically acting like my actual model, in that my model doesn't change size when I change my scale, but drafting hatch patterns do. But because the model hatch patterns are actually like my model, they're not changing, they're static. I've chosen the size of this particular model hatch pattern within the hatch pattern, so it won't change ever. And that's perfectly okay. That's what we want. And again, we can start to align. Maybe we want to align the edge of this wall, and we can align the edge of this wall here. Pick the edge there, and we can start to choose our alignment. So if we want to move any one of these, and you can't see it because of it was all the same. It's all the same. But what we can do now is actually, let's set a work plane, and just to confirm that our size is correct, we can set a work plane to the face of this wall, and we can actually dimension on this hatch pattern, and clearly it is 6 inches by 6 inches. Look at that. That's exactly what we want. Now, if we were to change this back to a detail hatch pattern, we'd lose these dimensions, it wouldn't work, and our scale would impact the hatch pattern. So that is the difference between drafting versus model hatch patterns. Perfect. You're probably going to want to deal with more with model if it's truly a model element. Otherwise, of course, deal with that in the drafting view, with the drafting hatch patterns. So going back to our Manage tab and Materials, we're in our stone material. That was the foreground. Now let's look at the background. So maybe we want to, just for the sake of this, let's go ahead and add a solid fill. And I want to make this red so it pops, and we can start to see where this is populated. So if I hit OK, of course it's going to populate everywhere. And that's just because I now have a red surface pattern. It's applied to the background, which means it's now behind my crosshatch. And this is, I believe, new in Revit 2019. We had the ability to use 2 different hatch patterns. So we were just restricted to 1 before, but now we actually have 2. Again, we've got that crosshatch, the 6x6 model hatch, and our red background. So that's perfect. Now the thing you might be thinking is, well, how do I know where this red and all of these show up? So I'm in a hidden line view, and because I'm in a hidden line view, they show up. So that's, obviously all of these hatch patterns, whether they're drafting or a model, will show up within my hidden line view. So let's go to shaded. And with shaded, we're going to get the introduction of shadows. But of course, because I've applied this hatch pattern and it's all reading off the material, this is where I'm going to start to see these things populated. Of course, just like the hidden line, it's still populated, it's still applied, the same material applies. I will now go even to consistent colors, and again, we're going to lose our shadows, but now we've got consistent colors, and of course we still, again, all of this information is read off of the material, and I still see my red with the crosshatch. And you might even be surprised that within a wireframe, because I've applied these materials, I can see through my building because I've turned this to a wireframe, but I can still see these surfaces where these particular materials applied because I have these hatch patterns to show it. We don't necessarily want to work in this view, so a hidden line is just fine. All right, so that works. So basically, they're going to show up in every view. Now, of course, this is not necessarily the case for realistic, because realistic is reading specifically from the appearance tab, and I'm going to save that for a separate video because that's something completely different. But everything within the graphics tab will be displayed in every view type except a realistic, because the realistic is going to pull from this information, and this information now happens to be just this default gray color. And so that's why I see that everywhere when I have this turned on to realistic. So again, we have set this up and we've looked at this different surface pattern and the foreground and background version, of course, the drafting versus model hatch pattern. Now, what I actually want to do is show you where you would use a solid fill, and I've set it as the background, but what happens if I put this in the foreground? If I change this now to a solid fill, and let's go ahead and make this red, and then we will make our, of course, remember we cannot use our model hatch pattern within our background, so that's something to be aware of, and this does begin to point to my point here in a second. So let's apply our crosshatch and make this red, or make this from red to black. Okay, and I will hit OK, go back to a hidden line view, and now we only see red. And now why do we only see red? Well, we only see red because our foreground color is a solid color and our background color is the hatch. So that foreground color being solid is completely covering my background hatch pattern. So that's something to be aware of too. If you want to use any solid color, it's going to have to be in the background if you want anything else to show up. And Revit does a good job of telling you that, because again, if you look at this pattern type in the background, I only have the option of choosing drafting. Whereas if you probably want to have something scaled correctly, you'll want to use the model. So I'm going to put this back to solid, make this red, and we'll put our crosshatch back on the foreground because that just makes sense. Again, model tab, or model there, and we're looking at our crosshatch, and you can even search the crosshatch. In this case, let's do the 1/2 inch. Now let's go ahead and make this black. We'll hit OK. And of course, because my scale is ridiculous, I have that hatch pattern, so I actually do want to change that back to the 6 inches. So I'll go ahead and search 6 inches there, and if there's my tile, 6 inch by 6 inch, that works out a lot better, looks better. So again, maybe you want to have this edge be perfect, have this edge perfectly aligned with this corner. Well, you can actually take this edge there and then physically align that joint there. And so that's another perk of having this as a model hatch pattern, because you can actually move this around. And so once I move this around, what does that impact? Well, of course it impacts what we see in this typical view. And of course, if we had any sort of hidden line view in an elevation, it would show up that way as well. But I do want to say that now if we go back to our materials, we can start to see that there is a texture alignment. Now this is there all along. It's not just after applying a model hatch pattern, but this is there. And so where does this come into play? So if you have added some sort of fancy looking image, and maybe it is that 6 inch by 6 inch stone, and you want it to show up in realistic views and you want it to look good and all that, great. Now, what if we want that realistic looking 6 inch tile to align with our model hatch pattern? Well, we would do it right here under alignment, and this is texture alignment. Again, this is why this falls within the foreground, because you're going to have your model hatch patterns applied there. So as soon as I click texture alignment, we can see that the same pattern shows up here, and we can actually start to move this up, down, left, and right to specifically get this aligned correctly. And of course, because in my appearance tab, I'm only using that gray color, which is why we see this gray background. But in reality, that's going to be pulling from this image that you might use in your appearance tab. So again, if this is the 6-inch tile, looking back at this texture alignment, you'd see the 6-inch tiles back here as a background, and you could physically align this hatch pattern to your tiles so that your hatch pattern aligns perfectly, or as close as you can get it, to your actual image of your stone. And so what happens then is that once you move these move this hatch pattern and align it to where you want it to on the walls, it's going to push and pull your actual image that you put into the appearance tab along with it. And because you've gone to the trouble of aligning them. Now by default they are aligned, it just may not be correct. So I would always check that once you've applied the correct size model hatch pattern. So that is the surface pattern. Now let's again look at the cut pattern. So I'm going to apply something similar, and again the same circumstances do apply from the surface to the cut pattern. So let's apply just let's do a basic stone here. I'll hit OK, and then background, maybe we want to make this again a solid color, and we'll make this a blue color instead. That works, and I'll hit OK. And of course, as soon as I do that, I can't see anything blue because I'm not cutting anything. I'm not cutting anything that this material is applied to. So to see that, maybe we want to go to a floor plan. So we can go to our floor plan here, and we're gonna have to zoom in quite a lot here, but here it is. We've got our blue material showing up, and we've got our stone hatch pattern showing up ever so slightly there, but nonetheless it's working, and it is there in the cut. For this video, I actually let's go ahead and put this and change the material in this wall to the actual structure of the wall as well, so we can start to see what this looks like. So I'll move the stone there as well. As soon as I hit OK, we can see our stone populate. We've got that background is blue. Maybe I want to make the stone pop a little more and make this more of a black color, and I can do that right there with black. I can also go into this, and I didn't cover this before, but because this is a pattern, I actually have the option of editing the pattern. And the problem is, because this is a drafting view, I'm just working with a scale, which is kind of weird and annoying. So maybe I want to put this at a half, and it's going to reduce it to a half. I actually do have the option of orienting this to the view, keeping it readable, or aligning with the element. I don't really bother changing these because in the end I want this to probably show up. I care more about the model hatch patterns than I do the drafting, because this is going to show up good enough and in some sort of a section cut or elevation view that I can deal with it however I want. But orient to view is going to show similar to what we looked at earlier, to where it's going to scale with the scale of the actual view, which is annoying. It's just kind of no way around it. Keep readable that's always like the grayest area within Revit, because there's keep readable checkboxes, and a lot of times you can't tell what the heck they do. And this is a similar circumstance. Keep readable, like I can't necessarily tell you what it will do. It will, I'm sure, attempt to keep it readable, but I can't tell you what that really means. I don't know. Now, align with element, that's that begins to get closer to where we want to be as far as a model hatch pattern, but it's just not going to act the same. And so still, I'd highly recommend that you use your actual model hatch patterns for anything model related that you need an actual scale to, because you can't apply a scale. So again, the only thing I can do is change this import scale, and maybe I want this reduced by half. And so I can hit OK, and as soon as I hit apply, I can see that is now half the size. I can see more of it. But maybe what we want to do instead is deal with this being a model. Now, if we look further into our foreground, we'll notice that we actually don't have the option of choosing a model hatch pattern. And that is specifically because it's always cut. Like, it's not actually on a surface of anything. And I guess Revit doesn't allow you to do that because you wouldn't really ever see it. Now, of course, you can make section cuts, 3D section cuts, whatever it might be, to see your cut patterns. But at the same time, it's not something you're going to see in documents as far as a section cut. Yeah, you'll see it, but it's not something that you're trying to get scaled correctly, whereas Revit allows you to do that on the exterior or a surface, because really it's the surface that the material is. You're kind of tracking the surface of the material more so than anything inside a wall or inside an object. That's just my best guess why. So just be aware of that. But looking back at this 6-inch tile, specifically the properties, we actually have the option of editing this, and here we get physical dimensions of this. Like we can clearly see our 6 inches by our 6 inches. We can even change the angle here if we want this to be 45 degrees. We can do anything we want with this. And this is just a basic one. There's nothing custom to this because it is what it is. So I can, even to display this better, I can click new and I can call this hatch. And again, it's a basic. I'm doing no imports or anything like that. I've got my line angle there at 45%. And if I make it a crosshatch, it's just going to do the exact same line, but 90 degrees in the other direction to create a crosshatch. And you can make this really any size that you want. So you can make a 12-inch by 16-inch tile just like that. And it'll be scaled just like that in 3D. You can change the angle, whatever it is. It's going to work out just like that. It's really easy to make these, and they're actually physically sized, which is great. So I'm going to cancel all this. I don't need that one. But we have looked at the surface pattern, all of the different types of hatches, be it model or drafting, the texture alignments, both surface and the cut pattern only allowing us to use the drafting hatch patterns, which is fine. It's just kind of the way it is. We've looked at all of this. Now, the thing we haven't looked at actually is at the top, this shading. So what is this? I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to go back to my 3D view first. And so we can look at this more formally. So right now, let's go ahead and put this. We'll keep it on hidden line for now, but let's go back to our materials. And if we look at our graphics tab of this stone, we can see shading. We've got use render image currently unchecked. And we've got a color and then a transparency. So basically this is saying that it's not applied at all. This shading is not in my project. Okay, all right. So where is it? What is it doing? Well, this shading is not applied anywhere in my project until this is checked. And that kind of makes sense, of course. But what happens when we check this? Well, if I check this, I'm not only is it going to change the color, but all my properties are removed. Like I can't even change the color here. It's just simply pulling from somewhere else. So where is this pulling it from? So it's actually pulling from the appearance tab, and it says it kind of it leads you to believe that it is because it says use render appearance, that keyword being appearance. And where do we see this information if we might want to change it? If we look in the appearance tab, we can see there's my information, and it's specifically pulling from the color. So if I change this color to a red and I go back to my graphics tab, I can see there is my red. So for this, I actually want to turn this off, and I want to change this back to a black. So we can see now it's off. I'm going to hit apply. That's great. I'm going to go back now again and change this to, let's change this to a green now. Hit OK. And now our graphics tab, it's not going to update until I hit use render appearance. And as soon as I do that, we're going to get that green color. And again, I'm going to hit OK now, and I don't see anything happen. So where is this being populated? So we've looked at wireframe, hidden line, shaded, consistent colors as far as all of these different surface and cut patterns and where they show up. But now let's look at realistic. Well, that's weird because I was looking at red building and now it's green building. And so now our green is showing up, and our green is showing up specifically because I'm in a realistic view. And so what does that tell us? Well, that tells us that this information being checked means that it's going to pull this information from the appearance tab and apply to realistic views. Okay, that's good to know, but why does that make sense? Well, that makes sense because in a previous video I mentioned that, and I think even at the beginning of this video I mentioned that this graphics tab is all the information, and all the information here will be seen in any consistent colors view, hidden line, whatever. But that the appearance tab specifically is going to be covering everything realistic in materials. And that applies to realistic views, of course. So everything in the appearance tab is realistic. Everything in the graphics tab is everything but realistic. That's a good way to remember it. And so this little shading up here, this option to use render appearance, is in a way an override to simply add color to your realistic views. So when would you use this? Well, I'd probably use this if maybe I've applied 90% of the materials in my project, And I haven't quite decided this one last one. And I want to show a placeholder, or I want to highlight a specific material just to show that, you know, either I don't know what this is, or it's in the works, or I have decided this material and we're not paying attention to it now, or something like that. Just basically just applying a color to a material in a realistic view. That's kind of how you use it and when. So again, finally, the graphics tab is everything but realistic views, and appearance tab, which I will cover in a video in the very near future. Everything with here is within the realistic view. So that will do it for the graphics tab. We covered everything as far as, you know, foreground, background, hatch patterns, whatever it might be. And you'll actually notice that in the modify tab and in these graphic overrides, they're actually the same as everything in our graphics tab, because it's operating the same and doing the exact same thing. Of course, you've got lines here as well, but materials wise, it's just those patterns. So again, that will do it for the graphics tab of the materials dialog box. We'll be back again very soon looking at the appearance tab, as well as maybe a finish schedule, how all this populates within your project and ultimately populates a finish schedule. So if you happen to learn something throughout the entire course of this video and my blabs, that's great. Also, if you just like the video, please demolish that like button. It really helps me out a lot. Also, please consider changing the phase of that subscribe button to existing. That also helps me out so much. If you stuck around this long, you're awesome. You're one of the very few. Not a lot of people stick around this long, so thank you very much for doing that. I sure hope to see you in the next video. Have a wonderful day, and thanks for watching.